Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Gord McCall. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the Lyric Theatre here in downtown Swift Current, Saskatchewan. And it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to a very special presentation, Lyric Digital Stage Write Out Loud number 8. It's a book launch. It's a book launch of Bonnie Dunlop's brand new book, Raft Baby. And to introduce the proceedings tonight will be one of the Write Out Loud committee members, Terry Taves. Just before we go to Terry, I want to say, as always, that we stand honored and privileged to be on Treaty 4 land. Treaty 4 land is home of the Indigenous peoples of our southern part of our province and home of the Métis Nation. And we move forward with all Indigenous peoples in a spirit of reconciliation and partnership. Also, we continue to stand in unity with people of color, Black people, LGBTQ communities, people with disabilities, and all those who suffer violence, oppression, and racism here at home in Canada and in our own province and elsewhere. Now, without further ado, I wanted to introduce you to Terry, and she'll take us into the proceedings for this evening. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. It's going to be a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome to our 8th Write Out Loud event on the Lyric Digital Stage. I'm Terry Taves, and I sit on the Write Out Loud committee at the Lyric Theatre in Swift Current. This is our 8th event on the Lyric Digital Stage, but it is our second virtual book launch. And the Write Out Loud committee is very pleased and privileged to be able to introduce Swift Current author Bonnie Dunlop and her new novel, Raft Baby. Bonnie grew up in southwest Saskatchewan, and she has always lived within a 30-mile radius of the family farm on which she was raised near Cantour. This is her third book, although it's her first novel. Her first 2 books are short story collections, The Beauty Box and Carnival Glass. Both were written while she was working full-time at Sask Energy and Transgas, all the while co-parenting 4 teenagers. This is her first book since retirement, although she has written some memoir pieces and poetry in the meantime. Bonnie likes to garden and paint, and she specifies she paints furniture and walls. She creates collages and other artwork for fun, and of course she loves to read and write. Traveling has been another enjoyable pastime, but that is on hold for now, as it is for all of us. Her writing has led her to the Banff School of Fine Arts, the Sage Hill Writing Experience, several retreat weekends at St. Pete's near Humboldt, and a memoir writing weekend in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. Bonnie and her husband enjoy camping and golfing, and Bonnie also enjoys photography, which dovetails very nicely with the first 2 pursuits. She says you can't beat a prairie sky for taking an evocative photograph, and she likes to find and photograph old farm yards and empty farmhouses and imagine the lives that were lived there. That imagining will have come in handy when she went to write her new book, her first novel, Raft Baby. In it, she has taken a truth is stranger than fiction story and fleshed out the fictional lives of the people involved. It is an unputdownable tale of adventure and loss, survival and triumph. I particularly appreciate Bonnie's sympathetic portrayal of settler women who followed their husbands into the unknown, often against their better judgment and far too often at their peril. Pregnancy and childbirth were fraught with dangers and complications, as evidenced by the population of women and children in those early settler graveyards. I learned a lot while reading this book, including the fact that there was a minor gold rush in the Peace River country in the late 1800s, and that many tried, but few succeeded. This is a tale of heartbreak and unimaginable sorrow, but it is also a story of great love. It will keep your nose in the book until the very last page. Raft Baby is published by Thistledown Press, and it is available in Swift Current at Pharmasave and at Breeze Boutique, and from the author herself. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this trip down the Peace River as told to us by Bonnie Dunlop.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Dunlop, and I'm here tonight to talk about my novel, Raft Baby, which is set in the Peace River country. I would really like to thank the Lyric for the opportunity to read online, the Write Out Loud group, and everyone who's tuned in tonight. I'd also like to thank the Sask Arts Board for their support of artists in this province and for their support of me during the writing of this book. This book is based on a true story, and how I came upon it was when my uncle died, and he had moved into the Peace River country during the 30s when there was nothing in Saskatchewan for people. Couldn't make a living on the farm, so he went up there just to work, and he was coming back. And needless to say, he never came back and made his life up there. So when he died, one of his children found this clipping in his effects, and it was the story of the Raft Baby. And he sent it to me, my cousin, and said, I think maybe this is a story you should tell. And at the time, I still have a file of writing ideas. So I just kind of popped it in there thinking, number one, I at the time was just writing short stories. Not just, I was writing short stories and poetry, and I hadn't written a novel. I read lots, but I didn't study the craft of novel writing. So that's where I had to start. I had to study novel writing and read more novels, especially historical novels, which I've always loved. And then I did the research, studied the history of the Peace River country, and also went to the Peace River country more than once, because when I describe the prairies, I know exactly what to say about the prairies because I've lived here all my life. But the Peace River country, I knew it was beautiful and a harsh, hard land in the winter, but I didn't really know how to describe it fully. So I went up there to figure that out. And it was just a lovely time because it is a beautiful country, and there's something, I don't know if it's savage or that pulls you in there, and it's such a hard country, and the people that have made it up there are very hardy people. So that's kind of where I started with writing the novel. And then I knew what the real story was, the true story of the Raft Baby, but it's a very unbelievable story. It's the facts of the story are really totally unbelievable. And when you write fiction, you have to make people believe it, right? So that was the thing. How do I get people to believe this? So I began to write using the real facts of the story. But as I got into it, I realized that I was writing more like a reporter and not a fiction writer. So then I thought, okay, I can't stick with the facts of this story. So I have to I had the bones of the story, but I had to throw that away. And then I had to imagine the people and their lives. And then once I started that, then the story came alive. And a lot of other people that were not in the original information I had came in and started being part of the story. And that's how I got the Raft Baby story to, kind of leap off the page instead of just being a report about an actual thing. And then I changed all the facts because I do write fiction. In the real story, the mother and father both they come from Ottawa. They are going to get rich. It's the husband that wants to become rich. The wife just comes along. And they are totally inept in the Peace River country. And so they're going back home with their baby. And of course they don't make it. In the real story, they are both together to the end. But in this story, the way I wrote it, somehow or other, I killed off the birth mother right after the birth of the baby. And it just seemed to me like she wanted to be out of the story. So I put her out of the story. And then it changed the whole story, because here was this man who was inept in the first place, caring for this baby in the Peace River country. So that was how I started getting into the story from a different point of view. And when I look back at the story itself, I noticed that I killed off quite a few of the women and left the men, holding the bag. So I'm not sure what that's about, but that's the way it worked. So maybe I should just start reading a little bit from the story. So the other thing about writing this story is that after I finished it and I went with the facts, where the story started from the clipping and how it ended. And when I was finished writing it, I just kind of put it aside. I mean, I was happy with the writing, but I didn't feel like I should send it off to a publisher quite yet. And I wasn't sure why. And then I figured it out one night when I wasn't sleeping, and I thought, oh, I know what. It's the Raft Baby, because it's her story. There are so many narrators, and the story goes from Ottawa, Edmonton, England. It hops over in time and place, multiple narrators. But I realized that the Raft Baby, although it was her story, hadn't spoken for herself. So then I wrote chapter 1 from the Raft Baby's point of view when she was old. And then I wrote the final chapter also in the Raft Baby's voice. So I bookended those two chapters onto the story as I had written it. And then it worked. And then I sent it away. And I was happy with it once I let the Raft Baby have her say. So I think I'll start. And this little part is the Raft Baby's voice. And it's the first chapter. And it's in the Condi Meadows Nursing Home, Manning, Alberta, June 10th, 1994. When I came on shift last Friday night, which also happened to be the full moon, we did reports. I was told Lily had been restless, unable to settle. I would be restless too if I had to live in this place, so I went to see if there's anything I could do. I heard the water running as I approached her door. Dear God, not again. I found Lily by the sink. She had stoppered it and turned on the water full blast. It cascaded over the counter's edge and fell to the floor like a miniature waterfall. She was smiling, such a wide smile. She turned to me, light in her eyes. Do you hear it? Do you hear the rapids? I reached for an armload of cardboard stiff towels, stacked in open shelves on the opposite wall. Yes, I answered, I'm afraid I do. When I was a baby, she said, I was set adrift on a raft on a great shining river. They say babies have no recall, but I, for one, know that is not true. Sometimes I still feel the rise and fall of the water beneath my craft, the brightest of stars lighting my way. The great yellow moon hanging so low, I wanted to touch it. But I cannot, for I am bundled tightly, and all I can really move is my eyes. I can hear the rapids coming closer, rapids I can feel but not see. I reached around her and quickly turned off the gushing tap. You've had so many big adventures in your life, haven't you, dear? Then I clapped my hands to my mouth. When I started working here, I vowed I would never be rude or condescending, never call a resident dear, and I had just done both. These lonely old people are not my dears, but they are someone's, and they deserve, at the very least, my respect. I threw down a couple of towels to stem the spreading tide. Water in the bathroom I could take care of. Water in the whole room would be something else. My arms around Lily, I guided her across the treacherous tiles, slippery now with a thin film of cooling water. I marveled at the remarkable softness of her skin, the silver sheen of her long, thick hair, a dark wing swooping from her temple to her chin. The streak is a natural lowlight, nothing to do with a hairdresser who comes here weekly to butcher the residents' hair. The men are virtually scalped with a clipper, number 1, I think, which leaves the hair almost invisible. And the poor women end up with either a tight, frizzy perm or a no-maintenance, almost brush cut. But not Lily. She is adamant that her hair is not to be cut, even one smidgen shorter, only trimmed with extreme caution, 1/4 of an inch at most, a sign of vanity I admire. She is shrunken, but not quite a shadow. 4 years ago, when she came here, there was a lot more to her. Round and firm and fully packed, she would comment when I was helping her with the bath. That's what my husband always said, and it's still the truth after all of these years. It's nowhere near the truth right now. How about you rest for a bit? I pulled out the sturdy stool she needed to step up and into her bed. I eased her down and tucked the covers around her thin shoulders. I made this quilt, you know, she said, with my own 2 hands. This was not new information. She'd told me many times before. She held out her hands, her knuckles knotted with arthritis. It was hard to imagine those gnarled hands holding a fine needle, sewing such tiny, even stitches in intricate patterns. The blend of colors in this quilt means to depict the way in which the northern landscape and the northern people are attuned to. Her voice trailed off. Above her bed, on the cluttered bulletin board, there is a square of stiff paper, white once, but yellowed now, and curled at the corners. It is one of her most treasured mementos, the detailed description card that goes along with the public art exhibit, explaining the inspiration behind the creation. Her daughters have talked of her quilting prowess, as if trying to make us see past this aged woman before us and into the vital person she once was. She was an award winner, her quilts taking first prize at all the area county fairs, and 1 or 2 of her creations were chosen to tour the province in a folk art exhibit. There is a picture on the board of a much younger Lily standing next to a woman with a halo of frizzy red hair, round, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her turned-up nose. The woman is brandishing an impressive red ribbon, holding Lily's hand. The quilt tucked around her was the lone remainder of her craftsmanship, the others now treasured keepsakes for her girls and her 3 granddaughters, who fill these silent halls with giggles and blaring music when they come to visit. The crack of bubble gum, the waft of lemony, light perfume. Lily's hands brushed the chocolate brown edging of the quilt back and forth, a soothing movement, it seemed, and she started again at the beginning. The blend of colors in this quilt means to depict the way in which the northern landscape and the northern people are attuned to the changing seasons. A center yellow block represents the sun, lending brightness to the I leaned closer to the card, picked up the dropped thread of her thoughts, lending brightness to the white, gray, and blue squares of the sky, then a hint of springtime green, deepening to the verdant hues of summer, Blossom time brings flowers of yellow, peach, and red. All too soon, these colors will fade to the gold and deep rusts of autumn. The yellow blocks in each of the corners reaffirm that the sun will shine on all 4 seasons. Lily was smiling, a beatific smile, so I continued. The black feather stitching is reminiscent of waterfowl in fall migration, the way they stitch the filmy gray fabric of the sky. Then comes the first skiff of winter snow, the pure white squares which ring the entire piece just inside the binding, like whipped cream snowdrifts, are indicative of the endless winter and all the hardships of winter in the north. A random touch of green stitching on the white squares features a floral motif, lending assurance that Mother Earth will always bloom again. There's a little more, I said, a bit like a postscript, I think. I took another deep breath. Reading aloud has never been my forte. Perhaps it's a good thing I never had a child. Or maybe that would have been Donovan's duty, settling the children into bed with a story. Scraps from my own rag bag were sewn by hand in the pioneer tradition. Plain colors signify the plain folk proud to have settled in the Peace River country, so very far from their homes. Thank you, Lily said, and she pulled the quilt closer. How in the world did you know to come and help me? Sometimes I ring my buzzer for what seems like hours and nobody comes. Instinct, I said. And the fact I could hear the cascading water. The water was icy cold, and so were her hands. Rest for a bit, okay, Lily? I've got to mop up the bathroom. I don't want anyone slipping and breaking a hip. Now do we? I love it that you always call me Lily, she said. No matter how many times I tell them, the others insist on calling me Lillian. It even says Lillian on the sign right beside my door. And the picture of me posted there is quite poor, too. I have never liked being a Lillian. A lily, however, is something quite different. She took my hand in hers. You do know, she said, that I rode down the mighty Peace River in a very small raft. I hardly think a little water on the bedroom floor will do me in. She's an interesting woman, and she makes me smile. And I wonder what her story truly is. So that's Lily in the nursing home towards the end of her life. And because we go to lots of places in this book, I am now going to go to the Peace River country at pretty well the start of Lily's journey. And this is chapter 2, the Peace River, September 24th, 1897. Trapper Jackson John had been paddling against the currents since the first pink blush of dawn. His muscles were screaming with every pull. Waves smacked his bow, and he was fighting hard to face the onslaught. The roiling water rushed past his canoe, grasping at its birch bark skin with frantic fingers, as if to slow him down. The Peace is not called the mighty Peace for nothing, he thought, and I'm so damn tired you'd swear I was drunk. 6 whole days of scouting and nothing at all. I guess I should tell you that right now Trapper John is out on the Peace River looking for any sign of his sister-in-law and brother-in-law who came from Ottawa, the greenhorns that were trying to get rich in the short-lived gold rush in the Peace River country. Anyway, here he is out on the river. 6 whole days of scouting and nothing at all. He hadn't spotted any beaver sign of his sister-in-law Isabel and her greenhorn husband. He'd been unable to find a single whisper. No one had seen them, not the Dene, not the traveling missionaries, not the lone trapper he'd come across. and he'd found no blackened campfires, no sign of human passage, nor messages scratched on massive rocks. His only lead had been the letter that found its way to Annie via a willing courier and blind luck. Annie is Trapper's wife back in the camp. Isabel had written that Edward was finally discouraged, almost ready to give up his dreams of gold, was considering how to take her home. She told Annie that she hoped they would meet somewhere along the shores of the Lesser Slave Lake when the autumn leaves had colored the shores and a riot of oranges and yellows and browns. Until then, she'd written, say a prayer for me, for I have not quite convinced Edward we must leave this place. And I fear we are not well equipped to travel, not even the two of us, and especially not when the baby comes. I hope you've already received my letter telling you that news and how frightened I am of the whole idea. I have quit talking to Edward of my fears, although at night they keep me awake. He would only assure me that things will work out just fine, which so far they have not by a long shot. By being wakeful in the blackness, can I avert the peril I feel gathering around us like the towering storm clouds? Most likely not. However, let us hope. Your loving sister, Isabel. P.S. I need you, Annie, more than ever now. Trapper pulled again on the paddles, but his heart wasn't in it, and he knew it was time to take a rest. The worst thing a man can do while traveling alone is to keep going past the point of exhaustion. Bad things happen then, most times, and Trapper meant to get back to Annie as soon as humanly possible, no stumbles along the way. He'd already been gone too long. The thought of Annie keeping camp and waiting patiently to see her sister again was almost more than he could bear. His powerful arms were aching, his back sore from the long day of sitting. He groaned aloud. Then, in an open spot on the south bank, he spotted a circle of charred rocks and a neat pile of wood. He blessed the unwritten law of the trail. Use what you need and leave a leg up for the fellow coming behind. He angled the canoe, muscles flooded with adrenaline, and aimed for the shore. The opening was small, and if he missed it, he had a jagged outcropping of rock downstream and a solid wall of forest to contend with. He didn't really feel up to any such challenge just now. With one mighty surge, he escaped the pull of the current, then paddled easily to shore. He beached his canoe, tying it to the sturdy aspen, its fluttering leaves laced with the first tinges of fall, golden yellow, ochre, and flaming orange under the fading forest of green. He tugged on the rope, satisfied his canoe was soundly anchored. With steady purpose, he gathered dried grasses, inhaling their sweet scent. He snapped small brittle sticks for kindling and laid a perfect fire. Soon he had a battered potful of the piece boiling above the blackened stones. He was hungry and he was tired, but he forced himself to the edge of the clearing and chopped a fragrant pile of balsam boughs. When he was satisfied with their arrangement, he was tempted to collapse onto his newly made bed. Not just yet, he thought, stretching his cramped arms wide. Not just yet. In the bush, preparation could save your life. When all my chores are done, there will be plenty of time for rest. Tea time. He poured 1 cup of boiling water into a thick green mug and set it aside. He'd shot and dressed a mallard duck at the end of yesterday when it was too late to start a meal. Now he unwrapped the carcass and squatting beside the coals, he slid it into the blackened pot and poked it down with a stick. He fumbled in the bottom of his knapsack for a bag of loose tea. But then he stilled, for upstream he'd spotted something. A tangle of logs? Something aflutter? A flash of red? All borne with frightening speed down the mighty Peace. "You've been alone too long, my friend," he muttered. The sun had eased his aching back, and the promise of a good strong cup of tea and a biscuit or two was uppermost in his thoughts. But his eyes were drawn again to the river, a small craft of some kind, hurrying down the Peace. He stood and shaded his eyes, staring hard at the water. He shook his head, checked again. I am not hallucinating. Grabbing his canoe, Trapper scraped its bottom on the rocky shore in his haste. It can't possibly be, but I know what I am seeing. Finally afloat, he paddled toward the middle of the river, his muscles flooded with sudden strength. As he neared, he saw it was a raft, solidly built. He was glad when he saw a small red flag snapping at the top of an upright stick, for it was a bad sign to begin imagining things while traveling alone on the Peace. Trapper John began to swear, a string of inventive curses, some even he had never heard before. For on the cradle board, wedged between two short lengths of birch and secured by a rope, he could see what appeared to be a baby wrapped in a blanket. He rode the river, his eyes darting between the bone-chilling water rushing by and the bucking raft. He positioned himself alongside and, leaning low, nearly caught the edge, so close. He turned his canoe, paddled hard, and pulled alongside the raft once again. This time, he managed to grab the crosspiece and hold on, his fingers clutching hard. Silver glinted on the burnished blade of his skinning knife as he slashed the rope securing the cradle board. He grabbed it and hauled it into his canoe, cursing still. Holding the cradle board close, he loosened his grip on the raft. Like a too small fish thrown back, it hurried down the Peace. "Excuse my language," he said when he looked down at the baby. "It's just that I never dreamt." A baby? He hadn't partaken in any pipe ceremonies lately or chewed on any unidentified plants. But could this be a dream? Or was it a vision? The Dene sometimes talked of visions. When it gave a small, mewling cry, he knew for sure the baby was real. He feared who it might be and wondered why in God's name any child would be alone on the Peace. The baby's features were fine, and a fringe of curls peeked out from beneath a bonnet. A girl, he thought, a flotsam baby girl for sure. As he paddled shoreward with the child, he was calculating her chances. At the very least, and against great odds, she'd found her way to him. Once ashore and his canoe again secured, he undid the tidy knots securing her, one by one, until she was free. Who? Why? Her lips were cracked and tinged with blue, and as he'd loosened the bindings, one arm had fallen free, as if she were a rag doll who had lost too much stuffing. But her eyes were bright and focused on his face. Tough luck, he told her, trail smarts I got, but when it comes to babies, well... He held her as if she were made of spun glass. You're safe and sound, he told her, but definitely soggy on the bottom. He spread his ground sheet over the fragrant balsam, laid her down with infinite care. How to change a diaper. He could track and hunt and fish, barter with the best, and find his way across this goddamn country entirely alone. But changing a loaded diaper was something new. He drew a deep breath, steadied his trembling hands. Eventually, he fashioned a crude diaper from 2 of his regulation dotted red bandanas, lining them with soft sphagnum moss. Moss more efficient than a sponge, he knew. Probably a lot better for a baby's bottom than soggy doubled flannel. She tolerated his fumbling efforts with surprising patience. When he'd finally finished, Trapper lifted her languid body and tucked her head beneath his chin. With a rusty voice, he began to sing an off-key lullaby. The baby drifted off to sleep. So Trapper keeps the baby overnight and worries about how he will manage and what he will do. So in the end, he decides that he needs to go back to the Dene camp where they had welcomed him, fed him, sent him off with gifts. So he was looking for the Dene and hoping that they hadn't moved on. So here he is. Trapper broke camp just after dawn, the baby snug in her cradle board and his arms ready to battle the river. A light breeze had come up and it was at his back. He was thankful for the help. And if he'd have believed in God, he might have said a prayer of thanks. They made good time all morning, Trapper paddling hard and the baby watching his every move. Thankfully, she did not cry. Eventually, the rocking of the river lulled her to sleep, her thick black lashes spiky shadows on her chapped cheeks. Just before the sun reached its zenith, he saw smoke rising along the north shore and was thankful that the Dene had not yet broken camp. "Wake up, Raft Baby. We have important people to meet." The baby's lips puckered as he touched them with a blackened forefinger. She yawned wide and began to wiggle. His arms tightened around the cradle board. Her violet eyes found his, and he suddenly had an urge to turn his canoe and paddle hard back to Annie, to home. An old woman watched from the shore, shading her eyes with the edge of a leathered hand. She waved him in, wading into the icy water to steady his canoe. "You are back, my friend," she said, "and bearing a gift. I have been waiting, for I dreamed of this last night. This one has been sent to us for a reason." She reached for the child, carefully unwrapping her, balancing the baby on the wide plane of her hip. She pointed to a silver scar on the baby's right middle toe. The scar was tiny, but perfectly shaped. An arrowhead, sure as she was born. "This scar," she said, "is much older than the baby. This child will survive the trials of life and live to a wise old age." The trapper reached out, his coarse fingers running across the small scar. "She will know things," the old woman said, "things that cannot be known." So that's Trapper and the baby. And where are we going? I think now maybe we should talk about Edward. He's the gold hunter that, he dreamt of everything wonderful and didn't see what was right in front of his face. And he left England, came to Ottawa, and was disappointed that the New World wasn't everything he was told it would be. So then the gold rush took his eye. So now he is here. The Peace River country, June 1896. Edward patted his vest pocket, felt his lucky marbles move, and heard their small, soothing clicks. He found and extracted the crumpled paper he picked up at the Hudson's Bay in Edmonton. Suggested supplies: 1 waterproof ground sheet, 2 Hudson's Bay blankets, a pillow if absolutely necessary, 1 granite cup, and 1 saucer per person, a knife, a fork, and a spoon, flour and sugar in bags, coffee and tea in tins, butter in a covered tin, a frying pan, a tin or copper pail with a lid for making tea or stew, 1 water pail, hobbles for the horses, matches in a waterproof tin, oats if you can get them for the horses. He refolded the list. When he'd tucked it into his vest, the little list had made him smile, and he'd meant to share it with Isabel. Imagine heading out on such a rigorous trip with so few supplies. But he wasn't smiling now. He surveyed all the goods Isabel had so carefully packed. She had crammed so much into each container that it had made his back truly ache. Just think of how many boxes and crates he had lifted and carried, first into the boxcar in the station at Ottawa, and then onto the platform, and then finally, when they reached Edmonton, into the wagon. She had tried to pack their entire life and bring it along. He, with just a few tools and some sturdy new work clothes, was traveling light. It was she who had insisted he bring at least 1 suit. What for? He said. Funerals, she replied. So that's Edward and Isabel. And now I think it's time we went back to the Raft Baby. So after the Dene camp, Trapper left her there with great misgivings. This is chapter 17, and it's called The Other Mother. My breasts will not stop weeping, weeping for my baby, weeping for me. On my bed of fresh-cut balsam, I turn my face from the light and I pray for gentle death. My husband seeks solace in the caribou hunt, the loud company of men, and he tries to ease his grief with firewater and sweetgrass smoke. And at night, when he comes to our teepee, he is hungry, hungry for food and hungry for me. Please, I cannot. Not yet, not so soon. I do not want my body to conceive another, to bring my weakness again into the world, and so I sleep, and I sleep. The tent flap is pulled aside, the light like needles in my eyes. Adahay, an ancient one who has brought me soup and a cheese and talked to me of my son, walks softly to my bed, kneels. Look, she says. She holds a languid baby, her tiny fingers splayed open, not fisted as a baby's should be. Summer is waning, and I fear you are too. This little one is hungry, thirsty too. See, her hands are already pushing on the spirit wall. And in the fading light, this baby fixes me with her violet eyes. I touch the center of her palm, and the little fingers curl around mine. You must help her, Adahay says, and she opens my buckskin wide, hands me the child, and also, help yourself. I stiffen, but the baby folds herself to my unyielding body. She smells my sweet milk and begins to make the small snuffle sounds, so like music. Her lips purse as she nuzzles. Then she draws back and holds me again with her eyes. Milk glazes my swollen nipples. As the baby fastens on, I pull the fullness of my breast away from her face, and she takes her first firm suck. Snuffle, snuffle, slurp. The beautiful sound fills my teepee, drumming in my ears and even in my heart. So that's the other mother. And then I picked chapter 31, which is close to the end of the book. And Samuel and Ellie are the adoptive parents who are living in Edmonton. Samuel works for the Hudson Bay, and Ellie takes care of her home and the Raft Baby after the Raft Baby arrives with them. So this is towards the end of Raft Baby's stay at home. She's about to get married and move out and begin the life she's dreamt of. So, Samuel and Ellie. He finds Ellie perched on a stool in the kitchen. The moon is full, and it's easy to see clearly the fine web of lines that will someday define her face. She's got a tattered book in her hand, but she's not reading, just staring out into the yard, brightly lit by the full moon. I hope you're not searching out more recipes. I think, my dear, you've worked hard enough. It's time to enjoy these last few days. Oh, Samuel, she says, turning, I don't know that I can, for when Lily marries Ward and goes north, she will really and truly be gone, for good this time. We can see Lily often, he assures her. I'll stop at their place every time I go up north to see Watson. Keep an eye on things. And I'll take you along, leave you to visit, if you want, while I do my business. It won't be so bad. She turns to the window again. It doesn't seem possible, does it? Wasn't it only yesterday you brought her home? Ellie, I'm home. No answering call from the yard, no clutter of dishes from the kitchen. The baby cradled in his left arm, he steps into the miracle that Ellie has wrought in the months that he has been gone. We're home. You can rest now, little one. Soft sunlight on the oaken floor, and the baby begins to howl. Nothing for you to complain about. By the looks of this, it's about as fine a home as anyone could want. My eyes found hers, and hers mine. Ellie's cool hand on his arm. Samuel, she is saying, let's have a hot toddy tonight. Maybe it'll help us sleep. You get the whiskey, and I'll boil the kettle. She continues to amaze him, for hot toddies in the dead of night are something they have never done. But big changes are coming. He can feel it. Maybe Ellie can too. A little more sugar for me. He pushes his mug across the table. Kitchen music, the tick of the clock, the clink of silver against mug. I was hoping they'd stay in Edmonton, she says. I don't know why they're so set on homesteading. What do either of them know about farming, especially in the Peace? Oh, I know they've studied up on it and they might have enough knowledge, but that's not nearly enough. Book learning's not the same as living it, not one little bit. And they could have done well enough with the jobs they already have. I still think of Lily as a little girl, he says. Remember how she begged to come north with me when I traveled and wanted to get a job with the Bay? Be damned if she's not going anyway. But if they stick it out and end up owning some of that rich black soil, it'll for sure give them a head start in life. Do they really need that? Ellie says. When we're gone, all we have will be theirs. And I do think we have quite a lot. We do, he said, but maybe it's the legend. What legend? Watson says that anyone who has ever so much as dipped a toe into the Peace River will forever long to return, and that longing will be passed down to their children and to their children's children too. And our girl was born somewhere up north, as far as we know. But we have no idea where, do we? Lily might have been baptized in the Peace, he says. I think it's very late and you're being fanciful, Ellie says, just a tired old papa. She reaches across the faded oilcloth and takes his hand. She's probably never been anywhere near the Peace, and anyway, I don't think it's possible for a river to cast a spell. He finishes his last sip, takes their cups to the sink. I'm not so sure, he says. He does not tell his wife that when he lays eyes on that wide ribbon of silver after a long stretch in the city, his heart lifts. The business with Watson and the legend at the store was cleared up long ago, but he has always manufactured reasons to return. And he's sure that Ellie has known that for years and years. I think maybe that is where I'll stop for tonight. And thank you for listening.
Boy, that was an interesting reading, wasn't it? Really enjoyable. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And of course, thank you, Terry, for introducing Bonnie to us. And also to Joy Donnelly, who recorded and edited Bonnie's video for us tonight. We want to thank you, as always, for supporting us in this time of COVID. And of course, here in the winter now, we're getting into winter. It's getting a bit worse, but everybody hang on. We'll get through this, and the sun will certainly shine again. In the meantime, if you could see your way to support us, if you haven't already, we'd really appreciate it. All you have to do is send a check or money order to the Lyric Theatre, Box 1143, Swift Current, Saskatchewan, S9H3X3. Or if you want to e-transfer, just send it to treasure@lyrictheatre.ca. Can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And blue skies ahead. Take care, be safe, and read a good book like Raft Baby. Thank you.